Yes, I completely agree with you.
If you're, as
yeah, it's that in itself is distracting as well.
yeah. Welcome everybody to this morning's live stream meeting of the Bolsover District Council Planning Committee. This is a public meeting which is being streamed live to YouTube via the council's website. The meeting is also being recorded for the purposes of the minutes, and I have been advised that the live stream is now up and running. If for any reason during the course of the meeting the public can no longer hear or see the meeting over the live stream, we will need to adjourn until the connection has been re-established. Can I remind members of the meeting etiquette that's been circulated and the procedures that apply for remote attendees? All members should now have their microphones muted and their cameras turned on. Okay. If you wish to speak on an item, please indicate this by using the chat function or by raising your hand to advise me. If there are members who wish to speak that I've not spotted, I'll be informed them by the officers. There will be captioning throughout the meeting, and you may notice that your wish to speak has been captured as it scrolls at the bottom of your screen. This way you can lower your hand so you don't sit there looking like a bit of a wally. Okay, members are reminded you must remain on camera throughout the meeting and ensure you are alone in your room. So before we start, could I invite the facilitator to confirm all those members who are in attendance? Please, over to you, Amy.
Nikki. No, it'll be Nikki. Hello.
Nikki,
So, just before I do that, I'm just going to click the record button. You'll hear a short announcement.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in the meeting room, the virtual meeting room today, we have Councillors Alan Bailey, Nick Clark, Jim Clifton, Paul Cooper, Maxine Dixon, Natalie Hoy, yourself, Tom Monroe, who's the chair of this committee, Graham Parkin, Janet Tate, Deborah Watson, and Jen Wilson. Also in the meeting room, you have Jenny Owen from Legal, members of the governance team who are supporting this meeting and streaming it, Chris McKinney, who's the Principal Planning Officer, and Sarah Kay, who's the Planning Manager. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Nikki. That's very helpful. Right, so we can move on then, please, to the first item on today's agenda, which is apologies for absence. So have we had any apologies for absence, please?
We've had apologies from Councillor Anne Clark, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody else have any other apologies? No, thank you very much indeed. Urgent business is item number 2 on the agenda, and today I have no urgent items of business, so we can move on, if we may please, to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interests and or other interests not already on their register of interest in any item on the agenda and withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Do any members at this stage have any declarations of interest they need to make? No, I see no response. Fine. We'll move on then, if we may, to item 4, which is minutes of the last meeting. And in your paperwork, that's pages 4 to 18. So first question is somebody prepared to move them as a true record, please?
Yeah, I'll move them, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Nick Clark. Does that receive a seconder? Yes, that's been seconded by Councillor Janet Tate. For this item, we can vote by a show of hands. All members are now invited to indicate that they vote in agreement that the minutes are a correct record. That seems to be all members, so that's unanimous. Thank you. We move on now, if we may please, to 5-year housing supply. And I'm now going to I'm now going to invite the Principal Planning Officer, Chris McKinney, to present our next report, which is item 5, the 5-year housing land supply. Over to you, Chris McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee, and any members of the public watching. This report seeks to update members on the housing land supply. And members or people will be aware that this task comes around given the government's focus on supporting and boosting housing supply through the planning system. So one of the ways that we are required to monitor the delivery of this is to prepare a 5-year housing land supply. The National Planning Policy Framework will be familiar to members. It has the presumption of in favour of sustainable development, particularly where councils can't demonstrate a 5-year land supply and ultimately, lose control of their decisions around housing and where that goes. So it's another important task, and we aren't the final arbiter in this. We prepare annual statements, but government inspectors from time to time will test us over this. Paragraphs 1.3 through into 1.5 set out a number of instances where government inspectors have ruled on council's 5-year housing land supply, and I'm pleased to say that the council's been found favourable in each of those cases, which gives us confidence that we have a robust system in place for this. Paragraph 1.7 talks around local housing needs. So for information, this is defined by the National Planning Policy Framework as being the number of homes identified as being needed through application of the standard and method set out in national planning guidance. So this is something that members again will have been aware of in the summer, and the government talked about changing this method. The current calculations lead us to needing approximately 225 new homes a year. Now this is actually lower than the target we set ourselves. Again, through the local plan for Bolsover District, we have set 272 homes a year as our target, and that is what we measure ourselves again. But it's worth remembering that that is above what the government currently see as needing, but it is what we will get tested against. In terms of delivery, paragraphs 1.10 and 1.11 on page 21 set out the delivery over the monitoring period. So for our purposes, the 1st of April 2014 is our start point. So we are obliged to demonstrate through this exercise that we have seen sufficient delivery of houses across that period. So as the bottom line on table 1, bottom right hand corner says, we've got 212 more over the 6-year period than we would need to. So that's again showing we're in good health on this. In terms of housing supply, so looking at what is yet to be built, again, the 5-year supply exercise needs to look at what is deliverable. And the National Planning Policy Framework and its supporting guidance set that out. And there's a definition on bottom of page 21. And that spills over on top of page 22 as well. So we've looked at all of those. We've taken that government guidance into account. We've written and spoken to the promoters of large sites and major developments, both with detailed permission and without, so those with outline or in allocations, and that information, that evidence informs the robust assessment that we've made. So at the bottom of page 22, members will see the table that sets out what our numbers are. There's a lot of numbers in this, I'm afraid. But ultimately, it shows that we have 2,739 dwellings in our deliverable supply over the 5-year period. That is above, as members will see, the 1,360 that we need under the kind of cumulative totals. Even if you apply the MPPF's 5% buffer, and we're above that too. So this gives us the confidence we have clearly enough housing to meet the 5-year supply. And And if you do the number calculations in paragraph 1.9, that's done for members, we essentially got twice as much as we need in a 5-year window, which is this demonstrates this council is boosting housing supply, and that is that is a very good thing. The paragraph, the appendices A and B set out that the information behind that. Appendix B runs through the list of sites. Those that are kind of pinked out are ones that we don't see any delivery within 5 years. Obviously, very large sites where development will take longer than 5 years, some of that falls beyond. So there is that in the pipeline. But the recommendation is that this assessment is approved and then published on our website. I'm happy to take any questions in relation to the report, the numbers, or the sites in particular. And I'll hand back now to you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris, for your report. So first of all, I will invite, do members have any questions? The first hand I can see raised is Councillor Maxine Dixon. Remember to unmute yourself first, Maxine.
Thank you. It's looking at page 30, at the bottom for Clown, it says allocation. There are various other columns, areas that have got allocation on. And then it says at the end that it's not deliverable within the 5 years. So like for Clown Garden Village, 1,320 not deliverable within 5 years. What happens now following this statement?
Right.
So, if I may, yeah, thank you, Chair. So that kind of highlights on very large sites, particularly the Clown Garden Village site, which is 1,500 to 1,800 houses. All of that cannot get built within 5 years, and so some of it falls outside the 5 years. So that end column that says not deliverable within 5 years shows the difference. So on the Clown Garden Village site, based on the information we have, we would expect 30 dwellings to be completed by essentially the 31st of March 2023. And then that increases to 60 by the 31st of March the year after, and then 90 by the year after that. And so because that leaves some left over, the remainder then is shown. So it's one of the it's one of the things to kind of bear in mind that large sites will spill beyond 5, and that you'll see several of those. The ones where we've made an assessment that it's not deliverable within 5 years are highlighted in pink. So a couple of rows up from that in South Normanton, there's the former site of Highlandhurst Hall Hill. That one, 40 dwellings, shows zeros throughout the 5-year window, and then 40 remaining. But because that's not deliverable, that has been highlighted in pink. So it's trying to capture those, which so there's a lot of information in here. But again, those that are highlighted in pink are ones where you could call them stalled, because we've not got evidence that they will come forward kind of at any time at this point in time. Those where we have got information that the site should progress onto sites and continue building, they're not shaded in pink, I suppose, is the summary. So Clown Garden Village is one that we expect to see based on the information we have.
Okay, Maxine.
Thank you.
Can I just follow that up, Maxine? Just to point out to you that the local plan, looking at the strategic sites, always understood that those would take up to 10, 15 years, some of them, to come forward eventually. A good example is Whitwell Colliery site, which before any housing can even be thought of, will have to go through at least a 4 or 5 year program of re-landscaping the current colliery tip. But that was always known in advance. So those are the sorts of anomalies. The other thing which I was going to raise anyway is that Appendix B, for all the best intentions, is anyway at the moment not an up-to-date document. Just to give you 2 very simple examples, and this is no criticism of the officers, it's just the nature of the beast they're working with. if you look under Cresswell, land to the rear of 64 to 74 Skinner Street, 88, well, that's already under development. That's actually started that. But obviously, this data was compiled before that was started. And likewise, if you look towards the bottom where it's Hobthorpe B2385, the 101 homes there, it says none started. Well, at least 2 are already built, although not occupied. They're now being fitted out, ready for being show houses, and other houses are being built on the site. So the documentation isn't necessarily exactly right up to date, and will no doubt be subject in the next few months to a further review. Okay, are there any other members who've got questions they wish to raise, please? Yes, Councillor Natalie Hoy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Under the recommendations, this paragraph 4, give delegated authority to the Assistant Director and the Chair and the Vice Chair for minor changes. Can you just give me some information of what minor changes would be, and when would it come back?
Chris?
I mean, that's something we've had on the recommendation for the 5-year supply for many, many years now. Technically, why it's there is in case we've made slight mistakes on the maths. So we always double check it. I don't think we've had to make any changes in the last 4 years at least when I've been doing it. So that's what it's there for, in case there are any minor typos in the maths.
Thank you, Chris.
There's a lot of notes and lots of numbers there, but if I know certain members of the committee have a maths background and usually pull up the maths before now, so I'm confident this year. That's what it's for.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Right, in that case, if there are no other questions, can I take you to page 24, where the recommendations are, and can I invite somebody, if they care to move the recommendations on page 24 at 6, please? Yes, Graham Parkins moved it. Does that receive a seconder, please? Yes, Councillor Nick Clark, thank you very much indeed. Right, again, if you're happy, we'll take a vote by show of hands. Make sure your hands can be seen in your camera. All those in favour, please indicate. Are there any against? Any abstentions? Then that is carried. That concludes that agenda item. So we'll move, if we may, please, on to agenda item 6. Agenda item 6 is to consider the annual infrastructure funding statement, S106 agreement monitoring. And again, I'd like to invite Chris McKinney to present the report, and the report in your documents starts on page 33. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this report relates to another of the monitoring duties that we do roughly at the end of the year, and kind of relates again another report with lots of numbers in, I'm afraid, but in relation to Section 106 monitoring, but also the new duty the council has in relation to preparing annual infrastructure funding statements. So members will be familiar with updates on Section 106s over the last several years. There's good reasons for that. I set out in the report and members are aware. The new regulations, so Community Infrastructure Levy Amendment under the Regulations 2019, to give them their full Sunday title, those came into force and required this council to prepare an annual infrastructure funding statement before the end of before the end of the year last year. So paragraphs 1.3 to 1.7 set out in detail what those regulations require. But in essence, they are trying to provide a bit more transparency on the flow of monies through Section 106s in relation to when we sign up to them, so the promises that developers make through legal agreements on when we grant permission, through to when those start, money's coming into the council, and then how they're spent. So it's an important bit. Officers will often advise that the Section 106s are the elements that, they've got to be, there's legal tests for them, but they're there to mitigate some of the kind of implications or the impacts of developments and make the development acceptable. So they're an important component, and ensuring that there's a robust system to deliver, make sure those benefits are achieved is important. So this is kind of why the government have brought this rule in. So again, members may remember from this time last year, we actually kind of saw that it would be wise to test drive this before we officially had to do it. So I reported last year to this committee a test drive. So you'll hopefully what you'll see in front of you is familiar, and we've refined it. But I think we definitely benefited from that test drive because there's a lot of partners in play within the council, outside the council, to make this work. The rules, the regulations require a spreadsheet. Now that's not particularly easy to read, or it can be, numbers can be presented in different ways, and it's not always that helpful in some ways. So we again have put together a report to cover that. So we're trying to explain it a bit more in English than maths. What is happening, what these numbers mean. So that summary report is set out on pages 40 to 54 of your agendas. And so within that, you'll see the kind of the key headlines. These again are repeated on page 36 about the money that's been secured through Section 106s when planning applications have been determined, the money that's held by the council, both what we received in the last financial year, but also what we were holding before that, and what have we spent. So there's also the paragraph 1.2, 1.3 talk about the monitoring arrangements. I'll come back to that after providing a little bit more detail on the Section 106 monitoring. So in that summary report, you'll see it kind of explains each of those headlines in a bit more detail. There's a bit more information in relation to graphs that set out what happens over the last 3 years to give a bit of context. Again, newly secured money. So in the last financial year, the council signed up to just over £1.5 million worth of Section 106 monies. Now that's great. That's great. It's kind of a product of the permissions we've been granting, but also it should lead to benefits for the district. One thing to be aware of that sum is that often outline applications don't specify a number of dwellings. They will set out a kind of broadly this amount. So, and then that gets crystallized at a detailed stage. So we don't always have a round number to put into this. So we've had to calculate based on the indicative number of dwellings and the amount of money we may be put to, say, health or education or by unit. So we've had to make an assumption in there. So that's one thing to be aware. Secondly, there can be a degree of double counting because we only are obliged to report for that financial year. So if this is a second Section 106 relating to the same site, we reported it to you last year as new and said hooray, and then reported on it again. So there's a potential degree of double counting. There's not really a way of ironing that out at this stage. But also, from outline, when developers promise monies to the council through a Section 106, to the more detailed applications when potential house builders come on after a landowner, you end up with a kind of, sometimes the sums change. And that's done for reasonable reasons. Often a developer has more detailed financial information than a landowner would. One example of this in the last monitoring year is the case in Hogthorpe, the Broad Lane site in Hogthorpe, where outline stage Section 106 agreement secured £427,000 for a new community facility. But at the detailed stage, where deed of variation was accompanying that detailed application, that actually was reduced to 50,000. So it's always been worth being mindful that the sums you're hearing, there's a lot of caveats to them, and those kind of changes can occur. But on page 44 of your agenda, it shows that the number of the new secured money, that's gone up by over £1 million in the last year, which is in itself is a good thing. In terms of monies held by the council, so this page 45 of the agenda kind of sets out a bit more, because it shows how that's also then broken down by the type of infrastructure, because we deal with sport provision, green space, education, health, highways, public art, biodiversity, affordable housing, community facilities. So there's quite a lot that kind of components in there. So it's helpful to like that breakdown. Partly because each of those is probably somebody different spending the money. So it's also, it helps us drill down to make sure that our colleagues in leisure or public arts or the health bodies are actually spending their money, and we can see where the movement is. And then in relation to money spent, again, this shows by those infrastructure types what we're spending. The graph on page 46 kind of shows quite a dramatic drop from 2017-18 to 2018-19 and this year. That, and again, because that's a 3-year period, that's in 2017-18, that was a bit of an anomalous year. I think when we started to do our monitoring and we kind of worked out we were holding that was actually transferred to Derbyshire County Council from the historic South Shirebrook permissions that we'd been holding, which actually they should be using. So, and then to try and make this a bit more, again, take it away from the numbers and make it a bit more real, we've provided a number of case studies so on page 47, a new play area in Tibshelf that's come through Section 106s, the public arts kind of projects in Doley and Bolsover, and then one of the larger sums we're holding in relation to highways and health improvements in Shirebrook, to try and make it a bit more kind of real, but also show that flow of money from permission through receipts through spend, those key dates to show how we're progressing. And I think from doing this time round, I'm pleased to see that, and it may be coincidence or it may just because we've been doing it, that the dates for some of the spends from our colleagues in leisure and public art are quicker than they were last time round. So hopefully that means this monitoring regime is actually having real benefits as well as recording it all. So finally, if I may return back to the report and paragraphs 1.12, 1.13, because this new national monitoring regime has come in, we have, and we've obviously been reporting to members on a quarterly basis in relation to Section 106 monitoring as part of our own audit. Myself, Sarah and Chris Fidlington have been looking at how we mesh these processes together so we don't duplicate what we're doing, but also to try and build in a bit more of a monitoring regime where we can get hard data from sites. So we will help us in this exercise, but also help us in this exercise by flagging up when trigger points become near and then when they've become past, so we can make sure the monitoring of the money flow is more real time. But also it will help us with our housing delivery test and also delivering our own and monitoring our own corporate targets in relation to housing delivery. So there's a lot in there. I'm happy to take questions. The recommendations are on page 38. I suppose the final thing to say is because the duty was to publish this before end of 2020, and there was no planning committee in December, it spilled over. So in consultation with the chair and portfolio, we had published the report and the appendix on our website on the 23rd of December, I think it was. And so looking for endorsement of that decision here today. But that's it from me, Chair, unless there are any questions.
Thank you very much indeed for your comprehensive report, Chris. Yes, we have at least one question. Can I bring in Councillor Natalie Hoy, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's really just to advise members that using the 106 monies, the mugger to Clune Street Park has now been installed as well. It's just I can't see it within the report. I think at one of the last budget meetings, it was highlighted that these monies did need to be spent, and it's reassuring, certainly for me, that they have been spent and the mugger is now being enjoyed by the community. So thank you.
Thank you for that update, Natalie. Is there any other members got any questions to the report, please? No? In that case, oh, sorry, Councillor Nick Clark.
It's not a question about the reports per se, Chair. I was just thinking ahead. Chris is aware of what I emailed, copied into an email about bus shelters going forward. It's an idea I've been floating, and I've been invited all the parish councils to respond as well, because I know bus shelters aren't just under our authority, and to what's called greening the roofs of bus shelters with sedum plants. I just wondered whether Section 106 money would be used for that going forward if that idea came to fruition.
Chris?
So the Section 106s are, the government have been tightening the rules on councils and how we can use Section 106s. So it's not always straightforward, is the answer. In relation to kind of essentially a biodiversity benefit, now that whether we can, as you know, you'll be able to see that biodiversity contributions are starting to come on stream now as part of the net gain, and it may be something that could come through that, but it would need to be looked through. I mean, in terms of each application, I mean, again, Sarah will know the rules probably better, well, will know rules better than I will. So it's maybe that there's kind of ways of doing it or ways that it would be not appropriate, but the tests are set out in the regulations, and they're directly related, proportionate, all those kind of things. So it's very carefully monitored. I don't know if Sarah, you want to add anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, not really much more to add, to be honest, Chris. But yeah, like you say, it's about actually looking at and mitigating the impact specifically of planning applications and that particular development. So it could be something we could take a look into. I wouldn't be comfortable committing to say yes for definite. The Section 106 monies we're collecting at the moment could be used for that particular purpose. But let's have a look at the avenues. Like Chris said, in particular, perhaps with the biodiversity side of things, there's potentially an avenue there. But it will all come down to whether we've got the control over the bus shelters and actually what contribution they make and that sort of thing. So perhaps a little bit more of a discussion to be had on that one.
Yeah, I can forward that email on to you, Sarah, if you wish.
Yes, please. That'd be great. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've seen the email because in my role as chair of a parish council, we'll be actually looking at it this evening at our parish council meeting. But just picking up the points that Chris made about the biodiversity side of things, I just wondered if there's not some mileage in us as an authority writing to the MHCLG and saying that the next time they review the MPPF and the infrastructure funding side of the MPPF or wherever it comes from, are they going to give any consideration to biodiversity issues and the role of infrastructure funding from developers towards contributing to mitigating measures being a requirement? Just a thought. Do you want to come back on that, Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's this council made a response to the government on the planning white paper, and I'm pretty sure within that we raised kind of anticipation, wet mouths and anticipation for the Environment Bill, because that is what we would set out in law and the requirements in relation to the net gain and biodiversity. So I think we're outside that consultation. I think we may have already kind of done that kind of thing, I suppose. We will have the ability to secure benefits through that when that comes into law, but we've started to do it now because developers see it as a sensible thing to do. And so I think the direction of travel is in that direction, and we may have already, through the plain white paper response, highlighted our and our waiting, our expectation that the Environment Bill will kind of help us in these matters.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that response. Anybody else got any further questions or points they wish to make? No? Well, can I take you back then to page 38 in the report and the recommendations at 6.1? Can I invite somebody to move the recommendations, please?
Councillor McGregor moves the recommendations.
Thank you. And Councillor Nick Clark has seconded that. Thank you very much indeed. Right, don't forget to mute yourself, Duncan. We can hear you muttering. Okay, so all those in favour of the recommendations, please show. That appears to be unanimous, so I won't ask for anything else. That's been carried unanimously. We'll move on then, if we may, please, to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7. He said, shuffling his papers. Right, and this is the appeals decision report, and I'd like to invite the planning manager, Sarah Kay, to present the report. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Just Nikki, there's a very brief presentation that I prepared on this particular case, if that could just be displayed on the screen, please.
Yes, I'll just prepare that for you.
So in terms of this particular agenda item, this is a regular occurrence on the Planning Committee meeting schedule. It's the 6-monthly update for the appeals decisions which we've received. And this reports in particular the appeal decisions from July 2020 through to December 2020. There isn't an awful lot to report apart from one decision which we have received. That's not my presentation. That's North East Derbyshire. That's brilliant, thank you. And we'll just jump to the next slide, please, Nikki. And yep, the next one as well. Thank you. So as I've just said, yeah, there's just one decision to report this time from the inspector. As members will be aware, we're required to report decisions, and we're required to look into the performance against our decision-making quality against major and minor applications. And this decision relates to a minor development. And actually, in this instance, the inspector has allowed the case to be approved against the decision taken by the council to refuse permission. So it relates to a property at 7 Clown Road at Barbara, where the applicant, that property is located within the Barbara Conservation Area. It's not a listed building, but it is within, like I say, the boundary of the Barbara Conservation Area. So it does have some local significance and some architectural significance, and its contribution to the conservation area is recognised. So the applicant applied for a new pitch roof to replace a flat roof on a detached garage to the rear of the property, which actually wasn't something that we took issue with in particular. What we took issue with in particular with this case was to do with the application also applying for the replacement of some finial details which had been recently added to the property. And the applicant wanting to replace some of those finials and actually add some further detail of that nature onto the various changes that he'd made to the property after purchasing it. There's an awful lot of planning history and appeal history that relates to this particular property. This was sort of, I think we were sort of about the 4th planning application with the applicant on this particular property after he'd purchased it and started to make some works. So some of the works that were undertaken as part of this appeal decision were to rectify some unauthorised activity as well. So I just jump to the next slide, please. I guess some members will understand what a finial is and why it's considered to be so significant, and it is significant to this particular appeal decision. Some members won't be aware. So a finial is essentially it's an ornament that's affixed generally to the apex of a roof or a canopy on a building, and they often take the form of a spike or a decorative point. They can be simple in design, or they can be more ornate. So that's what was discussed in this particular appeal decision. That's what a finial is. That's what we're actually talking about here. It is literally a feature added to the roof, and whether or not we felt that feature was an appropriate design or not. So the property itself, as I've said, it wasn't listed, but it does have some degree of historical significance. So we felt that should be safeguarded and protected, and we recognise that the property makes a contribution to the Barbara Conservation Area. The property had previously, or the occupier of the property had previously added some very, let's describe them as very decorative or very unique finials at various points of the roofscape to this property. That's what we became aware of as part of an enforcement case. And they actually took the shape of dragon shapes and gargoyles, and they were incredibly inappropriate and were the subject of a previous appeal, which the inspector supported, and the applicant was required to take those down. If I just jump onto the next slide, there are some pictures of what those finials were. So you can see the top 3 images there. Those were the 3 perhaps more ornate finials that the applicant had added to this property. We won that appeal. As I've said, the inspector completely supported that, and they were required to be taken down. So then the applicant reapplied to replace those finials with something of a more simpler design. So the 2 images at the bottom of this slide were what he actually applied for. However, we took the view that the addition of finials to this particular property was inappropriate. The property is a detached, very simple cottage, a very simple vernacular, and it's not the sort of property that would have historically had this sort of detail added to it. That was the view that was taken by the conservation officer, advising the case officer in this particular case. Can I just jump to the next slide, please? Thanks. So as I say, we thought that even though they were more discreet than the gargoyle design, they were still deemed to be inappropriate, and we refused permission for a second time for those finials. In this case, the inspector didn't support our view. He simply took the view that the host property, whilst it was of a simple vernacular, and he acknowledged that it perhaps wouldn't have originally been adorned with finials, he actually didn't regard the inclusion of those additions to detract from the character or appearance of the property or detract from the character or appearance of the Barbara Conservation Area. So he took the view different to us and decided that the finials were okay and accepted them. The inspector did consider that there were finials already present in the street scene. They are actually on the listed farmhouse Clownfields, and they're also positioned on some of the properties to the rear of this property, number 6 Speakley View, one which is referenced in the appeal decision as well. So yeah, just a difference in opinion, I think, here in terms of the weight that the inspector gave to the original vernacular of the building. We gave more weight to the fact that it wouldn't be an addition that would have been expected to have been seen, so we refused the decision, but the inspector took a different view here. So what we tend to do when we receive appeal decisions that go against officers' advice, we will reflect on those decisions and obviously report back to members, which is what we're doing here. And again, it's a case of actually seeing if there were any lessons to be learnt. And in this particular case, I feel like we did have a fairly justified view to take the decision we did, but in the inspector's obviously taken a different view here, but I don't think there's anything specific to our decision making or the quality of our decision making to reflect too much on this one. It was quite a unique and unusual instance and an unusual subject to actually discuss. So I just thought it was an interesting one to bring and point out to members. Just to report back, the gargoyles and the dragon finials have been removed, and the more sympathetic, slightly less decorative finials have been added to the property now. So if any members do want to have a drive past and have a look at number 7, the finials are there now and people can have a look at them. In terms of the agenda item and the update report, the reason why we do report to members is because we're monitored nationally on our performance. So when the council have an appeal decision overturned and allowed against our recommendation, we are monitored on that, and there is a trigger for which the government would intervene in terms of questioning the quality of the decisions that we take. That trigger is 10%. So if more than 10% of our decisions taken in that particular monitoring period are overturned, the government will get involved and will intervene. as obviously you can see from this report, we're talking of one decision out of quite a number of decisions. So it's actually, this decision only represents 0.54% of our decisions taken. So we're a long way off the 10% trigger for the government to intervene in terms of any quality of decision making that we are making. But again, it's just one worthwhile to bring to members' attention. So that's the reason for the report. Are there any questions at all?
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for your report. Does anybody have any questions on finials or other such obstructions or constructions, in case you're all thinking about having finials on your roofs? But that was a very heartening report, and it's good to see that for the time being, our decision making seems to be sufficiently robust. So if there are no questions, and there don't appear to be any, I will take great pleasure in moving the report as at 6.1 on page 57. I will move from the chair that report be noted.
Councillor McGregor, second, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Duncan.
And I also, Chair, before you close the meeting,
yes,
apologies for coming into the meeting late, but we had technical problems in trying to get connection. I'm talking about Councillor Kane, who's actually sat in the room here. We came in on item 5, and we have voted, and for the record, to support the recommendations as outlined in the report on the item 5, 6 and 7.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure that will be noted. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's useful. So all those in favour of the recommendation, please show. That seems to be carried unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. So that's agreed. Before I close the meeting, forgive me, but I just want to return to the first report that Chris gave us, because one of the thoughts I had during the course of that report, and I'm sorry, I meant to raise it then. It doesn't contradict anything we've done, but it's something that Chris might want to think about going forward. And that is, it's interesting to see that we are, in terms of percentages, we're way ahead of the 5-year supply. But I wondered if there is any mechanism whereby we are expected, or we should perhaps put ourselves under pressure to compare ourselves with similar district councils or areas and look at how they are faring and how we fare against them in terms of having a 5-year supply of housing, and whether or not that would be a useful exercise. So, for example, if we compare ourselves with North East and with Bassetlaw, both of which are part of, I know, our housing supply wider brief, is it worth doing a little bit of work on that, just to see how we measure up against other local authorities of a similar type? Just a thought. Do you want to come in, Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Informally, as an officer, we know my colleagues at the various councils around us. I know we are better placed. I'm happy with our position than I am with theirs, and that's is built on really. I think that kind of better performance is based on kind of two things. I think really. During the mid 2014, 15, 16, that kind of time, this council took a lot of hard decisions where planning permissions were granted on sites that were generally suitable but ahead of what we were planning for, and that helped us rebuild our supply, because back after the financial crash, like a lot of places, we suffered quite a lot and people weren't building houses in our area. So I'm always first on my list is that this council made that happen, and it's tough decisions that the planning committee make. But then also because we've been preparing a local plan, we've had to really think about our supply, because it's for all the aspects of planning that we've touched on today, and there are, housing is always the bit the government is most focused on, and as a result, we've really had to make sure we've got a kind of a good set of sites in place, and that is kind of So those two things, I think, are what have given us this really positive position, because we all know house prices in our district are, some are quite expensive, but relative to other parts of Derbyshire and to the region and in the country, we are lower. So despite that, and that market drive for house builders to build elsewhere where it's more expensive, they're still building around area. So that is, again, another good sign. So informally, I can update the committee that we are well placed, and it's something that I am aware of colleagues around the county and the housing market area and things. But if members wish to have that kind of not than anecdotal, but kind of something a bit more kind of studied, comprehensive, benchmarks, that kind of thing, that is something we can do. There's always a resource issue to a degree, kind of get it done, but if it's something that members are interested in, that is something we can do. So I'll hand that back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Will other members be interested in seeing how we perform next time we have a report? It may well be in a year's time, but would members be interested to see, as part of the report, how we compare with other local authority areas? What do members think? Do members feel that would be useful? Councillor Clark, Nick Clark.
Yeah, I think that'd be a very good idea, Chair. We can either see how we're performing better or not against other authorities, and we could also, for want of a better word, show off how well we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else of you? Yeah. Councillor Tate.
Sorry for that, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but as Chris alluded to, there will be costs involved and time. So as long as it doesn't cost too much to put this report together and it doesn't detract from other tasks that the officers could be doing, then yeah, I agree, it would be interesting.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Jen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with both them too, so I didn't say any more. Thanks.
Did you want to come in, Councillor Clifton? No. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, it's food for thought, and if with your sorry, Councillor Dixon. You're off. You're muted.
Just a slightly different matter. Can you, who can tell me how we come up with the figures on how many houses we should build in the 5-year plan? Where do the numbers come from?
Well, I think the short answer is it's government led. It's government led. The government set targets, and that's how these figures initially start.
I just wondered how they worked it out.
Well, Chris will give you some indication. He's prepared to.
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to Councillor Dixon's question, I will come back to you separately because it's quite a long answer and quite detailed. And just to clarify the point around that Councillor Tate made, it's not there to be actually a financial cost to, so we wouldn't have to pay anybody to do the kind of review of, but it's just so, but the resources is like, again, a time thing. But I think it's something we can include in future reports or potentially through the implementation advisory group where it's a bit more informal and we can do. So I will take that on board and bring it forward to members through one of those avenues. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Is there anybody else who's indicated they wish to speak? Amy or Nick? No? No. Okay.
No indications, Chair.
Pardon?
Sorry, no indications, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, that basically concludes the business of the meeting. Can I thank members of the public who have tuned in to join this meeting for their attendance and wish them all well, and I now ask for the live streaming to be turned off.